All right, thank you all for coming. We're gonna get started. Before we start, I wanted to recommend that if you're watching this through a computer screen, that you press speaker view, which can be found on the top right corner of the Zoom screen. This will make it easier to see who is speaking, and we have a lot of guests with us today, just to make that a little bit easier. So good evening to everybody. My name is Natalie Interiano. I'm from Care for the Homeless. I want to welcome everyone to this virtual memorial service. This is the third memorial that we have held starting in May. Since then, we have come together as a community to honor our unstably housed neighbors and community members who have lost their lives during this pandemic. As we continue to address the very real health impacts of this virus, we want to make sure that we can provide a space to mourn those that we have lost, as these individuals were brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, friends, and neighbors. We are joined today by advocates, service providers, faith leaders, people with a lived experience of homelessness, community members, and many more. We're going to have prayers, we'll have reflections, we'll have music, and we'll also be reading the first names of our neighbors that have passed. I want to call your attention to two things. The first is that as we read the names of each person, we will also include our beloved neighbor, J. Doe, at the end of every list. And this is intended to remember those individuals whose names we do not know. Second, you will have the opportunity to add the names of any community member that passed away and was not submitted prior to the service to be included in the readings. We welcome you to submit these names in the Q&A function, which will be at the bottom of your screen. We'll be reading each of those names towards the end. So now I'd like to introduce Rolando Matalon of B'nai Jeshurun, who will be offering some remarks.
Thank you, Natalie. As you well said, each person whom we are remembering today, most of whom I did not, or any of whom I did not personally know, but each person was known. As you said, they had family members, they had friends, they had neighbors, and they certainly, although they were unhoused for part of their time on this world, they had a home in God's heart because they were God's creatures. And every one of God's creatures is precious to God and has a place in God's heart. So I'd like to read a poem which I think says it all for this occasion, in terms of the value of each person. And it's by an Israeli poet of the 20th century. Her name was Zelda. And she writes like this: each person has a name, given him by God and given him by his father and mother. Each person has a name given her by her stature and her way of smiling, and given her by her clothes. Each man has a name given him by the mountains and given him by the walls. Each person has a name given her by the planets and given her by her neighbors. Each person has a name given him by his sins and given him by his longings. Each person has a name given her by her enemies and given him by his love. Each person has a name given him by his feast days and given him by his craft. Each person has a name given her by the seasons of the year and given her by her blindness. Each person has a name given him by the sea and given him by his death. And so as we turn now to listen to the names of these people who were lost at this very challenging time, let us all remember that although most of us did not know them, they were known, and they left a mark in this world, a footprint that will never be erased. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. It was lovely. Now we have the first list of names. It's going to be read by Beth Hoffmeister of the Legal Aid Society. I'd like to invite her on.
Abdul, Angel, Angel, Craig, Gerard, Hiromitsu, Horace, and our beloved neighbor, Jado.
Thank you, Beth. Now we have a eulogy for our homeless New Yorker, Leonard, written by his daughter and read by Nicole McVinois of Urban Pathways.
Good evening. As Natalie said, I will be reading this eulogy on behalf of Leonard's daughter. Leonard was born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina. He had two sisters who died before he did, and his mom who died in 1996. He was just released from incarceration late last year, and his family wanted him to move back to South Carolina, but he chose to stay in New York. He always had a good sense of humor, and he loved to look good. He was known to be a sharp dresser. My grandmother, his mom, spoiled him because he was the baby and her only son. During FaceTime visits, I kept his spirit up the best way I knew how. He died peacefully, which gave me peace, and I brought his remains back to Charleston so that his friends and family could say their final goodbyes.
Thank you, Nicole. All right, now we have a reflection in both English and Spanish by Felix Guzman of Vocal, New York.
Hello, hi everybody.
Hey, Felix.
So I have a reflection that I'm gonna do in Spanish and English. It's actually just a quick poem slash affirmation. It doesn't have a title, or I guess you can say forgive us our trespasses. So I am formerly incarcerated, formerly homeless, and for that reason, I'm choosing to do a piece on how to how I, as a homeless person, felt and try to humanize the experience for folks. So I'm going to do it in English. Forgive us our trespasses. Never are we nothing. Always do we have value. While we breathe, we must do so unashamed. Under the same sky we all suffer injustices and freedom. Some find peace with a roof overhead and some underneath the stars. Sleep forgives us our trespasses, while each new breath forgives us our yesterdays. And that was in English. And I'll do it in Spanish now. Mi nombre es Félix Guzmán. Yo estaba encarcelado en un punto y también era una persona sin hogar. Entonces voy a hacer una poema para más o menos explicar la situación que como yo me sentía cuando yo estaba sin hogar. Entonces el poema se llama El sueño perdona nuestras ofensas. Nunca somos nadie, siempre tenemos valor. Mientras respiramos tenemos que vivir sin vergüenza. Bajo el mismo cielo sufrimos injusticias y libertad, todos. Algunos encuentran paz debajo de un techo y algunos debajo de las estrellas. El sueño perdona nuestras ofensas, mientras que cada nueva respiración nos perdona nuestras ayeres. Entonces, este poema era más o menos para recordar la gente, el público de la humanidad que uno tiene en cualquier momento. Entonces, para asegurar que toda la gente está tratado lo mismo y con amor, con respeto y también para preservar la dignidad de uno. Entonces, muchas gracias por darme un tiempecito para que yo puedo hablar algunas palabras y siempre para adelante y siguen. So I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to speak. Again, as a formerly incarcerated person and a formerly homeless person, I understand the experience of being without a home, and I just wish that all out there continue to work towards ending homelessness and ensuring that we treat each other with respect and dignity. And with that being said, I thank you and peace and blessings.
Thank you, Felix. That was wonderful. Now we have comments by Reverend Amanda Hambrick Ashcraft of Middle Collegiate Church.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I'm Amanda, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm really honored to be here tonight on behalf of Middle Church. First, I just want to thank the Coalition for holding this space. We live in a culture that doesn't take time to grieve, and under a national administration that acts like death has not happened. So thank you for holding this most important space. The Christian tradition teaches us that every single life is valuable and that every single person is made in the divine image of God. And therefore, every single life lost to COVID-19 is means for grieving. We have a moral imperative to publicly lament. So lament we do. The intersections of this moment are not lost on us. We are here grieving a public health crisis, that of COVID-19, that disproportionately kills Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor people. And every life lost that we remember tonight was living with unstable housing. The detrimental intertwined effects of racism and classism and poverty cannot be untangled. And thus our grief must be prophetic. It must cause us to act. We must work for a world where we can pause long enough to look at death right in the eye and let it ask us why death is so. Our prophetic grief must connect in justice just today for Breonna Taylor, to this systemic virus of white supremacy that infects so many of us and has caused an unacceptable response to this public health crisis. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayers. We cry to you tonight in honor of all those who've gone before us. How long, O Lord? Holy God, who knew every one of these precious souls, comfort us now. Comfort us, the living, as we remember the dying. May we take with us from their memories that which provides us balm for our lives. Hear our hearts cry out to you in distress. Let us cry big tears because we are heartbroken. A country, a people who fail to face our reality and look death in the face is not a country or a people of God. God looks at all of us, our living, our dying, the ways we must do better, and is a God who holds us, calls us, and finds us there. And now God has found each of these people. May they find eternal rest in you, O God. And may their memories bless us all. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Ashcraft, for those really beautiful words, powerful words. And thank you for joining us.
Natalie, you're muted.
I sure am. So thank you, Reverend Ashcraft, for joining us and for those very powerful words, beautiful words. Now we're gonna have our second list of names read by Charisma White of Urban Pathways.
Hello, my name is Charisma White. Y'all ready? Okay. Israel, James, Jarrell, Leonard, Leroy, Lucius, Michael, our beloved neighbor, J. Doe.
Thank you, Charisma. And now we're gonna have a eulogy for Michael by Vera Kolpakova of Coalition for the Homeless.
Hi, everybody. Every day, hundreds of clients come to the Grand Central Food Program dinner at St. Bart's. In the long line that awaits dinner, we get to see a lot of people. And among them, some people stand out without even attracting attention to themselves. Michael was one of those individuals. He did not draw attention to himself. He was very respectful, very kind to employees, to clients, to volunteers. He had an air of kindness about him that was absolutely contagious. He always remembered to wish people a happy birthday, a happy holiday. He was also a big Knicks fan, and he often talked about games with Juan, the director of the program, and Ryan, another one of the employees with the program. And then one day during the pandemic, Michael didn't show up. We didn't know what to think. Some people stopped coming and then resurfaced, but we heard on the news that he had passed away. And his friends, the reason why he was on the news was his friends had pitched in to pay for a burial, proper burial for him. And as we remember so many people who passed away, so many of them unnamed to most of us, clients, faces in the food line, faces on the street, people sleeping on the street, sitting on church steps, on the subway, people we pass by every day. We mourn the lives of those who had been lost. We think about creating a better world for those who are out there. And we think of so many who have passed and who have lost their life in the pandemic and who are buried in unnamed graves on Hart Island. And with these words, blessings to Mr. Michael and those with him whose names we will never know. Thank you.
Thank you, Vera, for sharing those kind words about Michael. Now we have a reflection in Spanish by Miss Fulvia Fraser. She's from Care for the Homeless. I'll invite her on.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, great. Hi. Excuse me a second. Okay, got it. All right. Good evening, everyone. This year has not been easy for everyone. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was there was and remains so many unknowns. Many of us who were experiencing homeless had an even greater sense of isolation and fear isolation and fear as we saw our friends and neighbors deal with the health effects of pandemic. Thankfully, there have been communities support and the community, bear with me 1 second, I'm sorry.
Take your time, no worries.
Okay. We have a responsibility to honor those that have left us too soon. We put together a few words that many hopes for the future are in Spanish. Okay? I am going to read to you in Spanish a few words. Nosotros reunimos para reconocer a nuestros vecinos que fallecieron estos últimos meses sin una vivienda estable. En esta, la ciudad más rica de los Estados Unidos, con una de las poblaciones más grandes de personas y familias sin hogar. Somos testigos de la vida de las personas que murieron sin hogar este año. Reconocemos a estas personas y reconocemos sus vidas leyendo sus nombres. Nos recuerdan que no importa lo difícil que pueda ser la vida, todos debemos de aprender de ella y abrazarla cada momento porque nunca sabemos cómo o cuándo terminará. Cada muerte es una tragedia, pero este año, mientras lamentamos la pérdida de nuestros vecinos, hay una sensación de pérdida aún mayor a medida que la ciudad llora por todas las vidas perdidas. Mi esperanza es que la lista de nombres que leemos reciba el reconocimiento que merecen. Mi deseo es que la lista se acorta de cada año y mi deseo es que todos estemos a salvo durante esta crisis. Mi mayor esperanza es que este sea un testimonio de la importancia vital que tiene un hogar estable para la salud, el bienestar y la seguridad de todas las personas. Necesitamos invertir en nuestra humanidad compartida a través de la inversión en viviendas accesibles al público. Necesitamos construir comunidades más saludables y compasivas que garanticen que se satisfagan las necesidades humanas básicas de todos los residentes. Que esta memoria sea un recuerdo para todos nosotros de que trabajando juntos podemos reforzar nuestra red de seguridad de alimentos, asistencia médica y de vivienda para no perder otro hermano y hermana en las calles. A través de todas las estadísticas sobre personas sin hogar, es fácil olvidar que las cifras corresponden a personas reales con vidas y familias. Debemos recordar sus vidas y debemos recordar por qué murieron. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fraser.
Thank you.
All right, now we have comments from Reverend Pervez P. Patel of the Zoroastrian community.
Thank you. My name is Parvez Patel and I represent the Zoroastrian religion. Most of you, as well as most of people in Western world, have never heard of our religion. Our Zoroastrian religion is believed to be the first monotheistic religion on earth, believing in one God, propagated by our prophet Zarathustra, sometime between 8,000 to 3,500 BC, according to Western as well as Zoroastrian scholars. Ours is one of the lesser known and micro religion which is followed by less than 200,000 people in the whole world. It originated in ancient Persia, which is known as modern Iran today. Name Zarathustra means golden shining star. The religion is based on Vahumana or good mind and Asha or righteousness, truth and love. God has given us free will and we have to use our good mind to decide between good and evil. We are responsible for our actions and decisions and bear its consequences right here in our lives. In a nutshell, our religion rests on three pillars of Humata, meaning good thoughts, Hukta, meaning good words, and Huvarsta, meaning good deeds. Zarathustra, our prophet, introduced the unique idea that purpose for human life is to emulate the attributes of Ahura Mazda, the all-wise Lord, and help move his creation towards perfection. Ahura Mazda has given every human being with a mind so that we can think and discern for what is good and bad and rationally choose our own path in life. The human mind is the best gift that has been bestowed on us, and we are the only species in the world that can assess and discriminate rationally good from evil. By making use of our own mind, we can be creative, constructive, and progressive, or unimaginative, destructive, and ignorant. The freedom to choose between good and evil is the underlying principle of our religion, Zoroastrianism. In our religion, everyone's soul is guided by a Fravashi, or a divine guardian angel. Today, on this solemn occasion of the memorial for the homeless, I would like to recite a prayer from our Zoroastrian scriptures, remembering the souls and flourishes of all of the world's homeless souls who have passed on from this world, and wishing them life hereafter in the utmost care and love of our merciful Lord. Then I would like to explain the meaning of the prayer briefly and touch upon the fragility or nature of life and death. Ashaunam mungoisrao spentao fravashio. Stau means bayami ufiemi yazamaide. Lmaniao visiao zantumao lakumao Zarathustro temao. Ida shaunam urvano yazamaide. Ida irisanam urvano yazamaide. Yao ashaunam frabashio. Yenge atam atyasne paiti vangaho. Mazdao ahuro vaita ashata chao. Yongam chao tas chao taos chao yazamaide. Hashem vohu vahishtem asti ushtasti ushtamai yatashai vahishtai Hashem. The meaning of the above prayer is, we praise, remember, and invoke the good, heroic, and beneficial souls and flourishes of our righteous, but less fortunate homeless brothers and sisters who suffered and were ignored immeasurably while they lived on this earth. We sing for their glory and worship their prowesses. From their homes where they were born, grew up, and lived, to their unpredicted plights on the streets of towns and cities they ended up with, and from where they left this world. Their lives and living was less than what they deserved. Indeed, the all-wise Lord knows better all such people among men and women and venerates them. We all must venerate and respect them as well. Life and death are two sides of the same coin. From one door you enter the world and it is life. And from another door you leave the world and it is death. Some live happily, whereas it is a struggle for most. Law of karma says, as you sow, so shall you reap. This is the universal truth and lesson of life. Unlike the speakers who were speaking before me, unfortunately, I did not have the experience of dealing with any homeless person in person. I came across as I moved from street to street, and many times I gave them money. Unfortunately, I must admit, I did not stop by and say to them what happened to them, what was their life, how did they end up on the streets. And I would regret that, but I would try from now on to take some time and speak with them and know their story. In the end, may the righteous souls of all homeless of the world rest in peace in heaven. Ata Zamyad Yatha Afrinami. Thank you very much.
Thank you, River Patel, for that prayer and for those words. And thank you for joining us.
Welcome.
Now we're going to have a remembrance of Tom Waters by Michael McKee.
Good evening. I want to thank, first of all, want to thank the Coalition for the Homeless for sponsoring this very moving event. My name is Michael McKee. I'm the treasurer of the Tenants Political Action Committee. I've been asked to talk about Tom Waters, who was not homeless, but who was a very important member of the tenant rights community and the tenant movement. He was the first person I knew who died of COVID on April 4th, which was very early in the pandemic. He was never tested for the illness, but he had all the symptoms, so we had to assume that that was what killed him. And it happened very rapidly. I mean, he got sick and was dead like 4 or 5 days later. And since then, I've had another close friend who actually was a priest from Staten Island who died of COVID. And 3 of my board members got sick, very sick with the COVID-19 virus. And fortunately, they've all recovered. But one of them is still having very serious lingering effects from the illness. So this is a really terrible, terrible disease. I met Tom in 1999 when he and his girlfriend, Hillary, relocated to New York City from Knoxville, Tennessee, where he had been active in the Poor People's Campaign and various other kinds of community activities. He applied for a job at Tenants and Neighbors, the statewide Tenants Rights Coalition, where I was working. And for 5 years, we were office mates. We shared the same office, and so we were with each other all day long for all those years. And when you share an office with someone, you get to know them pretty well. He loved jazz, he loved opera, he loved the Bronx where he and Hillary lived. And we were very much, a lot of what we talked about was politics. And Tom really helped me with my political education because he had a background in radical economic and political theory, things that I was sort of vaguely aware of. And he gave me things to read, books, etc. And I owe him a lot in terms of my political education. There came a time in 2003 when Tom became the interim executive director of Tennyson Neighbors at a time that was very difficult for the organization. We had lost funding, we had to lay people off, everyone took pay cuts, and for the next year and a half, he did a terrific job of pulling things together and getting us back on our feet. And I was hoping that he would want to be the permanent executive director, but he told me, no, I want to go to grad school and learn statistics. And it's fortunate that he did, because he became a source and a resource for the entire tenant movement. He got a degree from Columbia University. He went to work for the Community Service Society as a housing policy analyst. And over the last 13, 14 years, produced a series of very important and useful reports and data analysis about all sorts of housing issues and things that affect renting families and low-income people. And we lost him too soon. He was 56 years old. He was almost finished with his PhD dissertation. And he leaves his longtime girlfriend, Hillary. He always referred to her as his girlfriend, and their 20-year-old son, Daniel. I think of him every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McKee, and I'm very sorry for your loss, and thank you for offering those really wonderful words of Tom Waters. Next, we're going to have comments from Reverend Michael Livingston, the interim senior minister at Riverside Church.
We are born into a world deeply divided by barriers of every kind: caste, race, religion, class. There are haves and have-nots, first and third world countries, the privileged and underprivileged. In our own nation, there are red and blue states, suburban, urban, and rural communities with little in common except toleration bordering on contempt for the other, if not indifference. Some among us can afford private schools or de facto segregated public schools, while many Black and brown children, poor white children, immigrant children are relegated to underfunded public schools, some of them decent and high-performing, and too many of them struggling to provide a barely sufficient foundation for surviving in our competitive environment, to say nothing of the possibility of moving on to higher education. Some of us ride cabs and Lyft or Uber. Some are driven in limousines. Others take subways and buses and have no other alternative except to walk. Some have nowhere to go and live their days within the borders of the islands of the borough, the city, or state. We are divided by those whose privilege grant opportunities for high-paying jobs with lucrative benefits, and those at the very bottom whose incomes cannot support a decent living standard. At the top, some live high above the ground in rarefied spaces, and others live in shelters or on the streets, wherever they can find warmth in the winter, relief from the heat and humidity in hot summer months. Fine white tablecloth dining with no thought to the cost divides the haves from those who scrounge for daily bread, finding what they eat, begging for what they can buy, accepting the charity of individuals and organizations that attend to their need as best they can. All of these divisions have been heightened in this pandemic. And this wonderful series of services to mourn the deaths of the homeless among us, we have heard the names of brothers and sisters lost to themselves, lost to us in the chaos of this moment in our history. The differences matter. The least among us decimated by this invisible plague that would be indifferent to difference if only we were all truly equal, not in the eyes of God, but in the biased distribution of resources in our fractured city, nation, and world. All of these differences mask the underlying God-created, indivisible oneness we share in the one family of God in our city and in the world. Our blood is red. Our breath is God-given. Our food comes from the earth. Our bodies are composed of identical elements, mostly in water. We are all born of woman and will die in the providence of God, in whose image each one of us is formed. To mourn the loss of the homeless, whose names we have heard this evening, and those whose names we will never know, is to mourn the loss of a precious child of God, our kin, family, in the deepest sense possible. Each death reminds us that as much as we are doing to address the divisions that lead to death, we must do even more, ever more, until the work is done and there is a safe place everyone can call home.
Thank you, Reverend Livingston. And now we have the final reading of the names, and this is by Giselle Ruthier from Coalition for the Homeless.
Thank you, Natalie. Michael, Montgomery, Richard, Rudolph, Tom, and Vicente.
Thank you, Giselle. Now we're going to have a eulogy for J. Doe by Mark Greenberg of the Interfaith Assembly on Homelessness and Housing.
Thank you, Natalie. And thank you all for being with us today. It's been very moving. This is the third of our services. It's a great honor to be with you today and to remember. I've been asked to speak about the loss of J. Doe, those sisters and brothers who we have lost during the COVID-19 crisis, many of whose names are not known to myself and many others. And many stories are unknown to me. So I want to begin, if I may, to speak briefly about two people who I did know, who were taken from us before their time. One, we lost in 1990, 30 years ago, and the other just lost recently to this terrible crisis. Tom Evers was part of our vigil in City Hall Park in 1989. He was a tall, white man with a long beard who hardly said a word. And he became one of our first interns, and he worked in our office, and we started to get to know him. It turned out that Tom, when we were working on our computers, Tom said, oh, I worked with these at Brown University when they were only punch cards. He was working with the first computers ever made. We started to learn a little bit about Tom. He started to open up, and it was wonderful working with him. And he used to walk home from where our office was at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, walk back to the church where he was staying at St. Augustine's Episcopal Church down the Lower East Side, and stop off in a park and have a beer and go to sleep. And one day he was sitting in that park and he got stabbed by a crack addict and died. And then when we announced his funeral, we started to learn about him. We learned that he had attended Brown. He had had a perfect 1,400 SATs. He had an incredible jazz collection. He became homeless because when he was working, when he was in Vietnam, and he was developing photographs of the horrible carnage that was taking place and smoking a lot of pot, he kind of lost his way and became homeless. So I mentioned Tom to remind us that the people we've lost, we know so little about. There's so much more to them than what we know. The other person I want to mention is Pamela. Now, Pamela is a member of the leadership team of a group called the Life Experience and Faith Sharing Associates. It's this wonderful homeless self-help community that numbers at its largest around 350 people. They have 350 people for their Christmas parties and for their picnics. And before COVID, about 100 people a month would gather in what they call their leadership days. And a woman by the name of Carolina had been the administrative assistant to the director, and then she decided to leave to pursue an acting career. And then Pamela, who was a member of the leadership team, was being groomed to take over for her, to take over as the assistant. And then COVID hit, and Pamela was taken by it. And so we didn't only lose Pamela, but we lost someone who was going to be supporting a community of 350 homeless people. We lost her just as he was about to take that responsibility. So as we seek to honor and recognize Jay Doe and those represented by this name, let us remember that many of the members of our human family were going through the worst moments of their entire lives, and that they were treated by many who they encountered on the street as invisible or worthless or worse. Were treated by many of the staff and some of their fellow homeless people as unworthy of love and compassion. And even for those of us who sought to provide them support and understanding, their true nature and their precious gifts were barely known to us. And in fact, in far too many cases, our homeless brothers and sisters had even forgotten themselves who they are and who they can be. So in addition to mourning their loss, we must also mourn the life that they were not able to live. All gifts that they had, they were not able to share. The wisdom they will never impart. But I also want to take a moment to remind us that many of us here worked very hard to prevent more lives among the homeless community from being lost to the virus, and successfully pressed the city to move over 10,000 people from our congregate shelters into commercial hotels. And as a result, we know many, many lives have been saved. So even as we mourn the loss of those who've been taken from us at this, the most vulnerable time of their lives, let us work our hearts out to celebrate the lives of those who've been saved. Celebrate them not only by protecting them from COVID-19, but by supporting them as we work to help them rebuild their lives. Celebrating not only who they are, but who they are striving to be. And praying for them and their families and all of us that they can be who God has intended for them to be, because we need them to help heal and rebuild our wounded city, and join us as we work together to create a city where all have a safe and decent home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. It's a great call to action as well. Now we're going to have comments by Reverend Monchin Paul Namon of Tendai Buddhist Institute.
It's a privilege to join you for this sacred occasion. This event falls during a period in the Buddhist calendar called Ohigan in East Asian Buddhism. And Ohigan is a time in which the day and night are of equal length. And it's a period of time in which it is believed that the spiritual world and the mundane world are closest together, the spirits of those who have passed. And so during this period of time, we observe in many ways those who have died during the year and on memorial years. And this year we had the Sagaki service, and the Sagaki service is a service for the Preta. The Preta are the hungry ghosts. And fortunately, I had the list that was sent to me that has been read, and so we included the names of those who had died homeless in New York City from the list that you've been reading from today. And we included that in the service. That's part of our observance. Within the Buddhist context, I thought about I reflected, I guess, on the paradox that Buddhism was started by homeless people. Difference was they were sramana, they were voluntarily homeless, they were renunciants, they had left their home in order to seek spiritual attainment of some level. And so it seems a bit paradoxic that we now look at the homeless in many ways as those who are bereft, and they may be bereft of material goods, but not of spirit. And so I would like to read to you the Kyodan, the sutra that was read during the Sagaki service that I conducted this past Sunday, because I think it does speak to this condition that we are addressing today. And this is called the Compassionate Mountain Cloud Sutra, and it comes from the 3rd chapter. Rahula, who was an assistant to Shakyamuni Buddha, asked the most precious of enlightened beings, of those who are in the Preta realm, what can be done to save them? Thus did he speak, referring to Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha. We see before us jewels and precious metals. Do we want to possess those rare elements for their intrinsic qualities or for the value other humans have placed upon them? Do we know the difference? We see before us our own desire for comfort. Do we persist in this comfort without thought to the price others may have to pay to bring us this ease? Do we perceive that there is a difference? We see before us humans in need. Do we wish to save them for the sake of their being or for the merit we will earn? Do we recognize the difference? We see before us wisdom. Do we wish to obtain it in order to live in peace with those around us or for the recognition we will receive? Do we care that there is a difference? We see before us suffering. Do we turn our heads so that we are not made uncomfortable? Do we have concern that extends beyond our own desires? The realm of those whose desires are greater than their compassion must become aware of their state. Through bodhisattvas' entreaties and their own realization, Preta are liberated from their unfortunate Preta cycle of samsara to dwell on a higher plane. This life we know is filled with suffering. It is through our awakening that suffering is lifted like a mist from before our eyes. Awaken, awaken, awaken from the illusion that desire is life. And I dedicate this to those who have lost their lives during this COVID crisis. Svaha.
Thank you, Reverend Namon. And now we're going to play a song by Glenn Ruffel. It's called Together.
Together. when I go home to the world out there with so much to share. I won't be alone when I go home with my open heart. I will do my part, and I won't forget the things that I've done and the people I've met, the places I've gone, 'cause we haven't all gone there yet. We are together in this life. We walk together. We are together in this life. We walk together. When I go home to my other home, where my heart can roam, I'll go everywhere. When I go home, I will see you all again. All my heart's connected friends, I'll see you again. Well, nothing is perfect, but everything will change. The world is renewed, but our connection will remain. 'Cause we are together in this life. We walk together. Yes, we are together in this life. We walk together. Uplifted by the things I believe, and grateful for the gifts I've received. Whoa, whoa. When I go home to the world out there with so much to share, so much to share. Surrounded by you, my family, and grateful for the gifts I've received. I will not forget, I will not be discouraged. I will keep this love alive. We are together in this life. We walk together. Yes, we are together in this life. We walk together. We're together. We are together and we walk together. No one is ever alone. We are all traveling, time is unraveling. We are all coming home. Yes, we are all coming home. And we walk together.
Thank you, Glenn Rothel. That was a beautiful song. We've come to the end of this remembrance. I want to thank the Coalition for the Homeless and the Legal Aid Society for hosting and facilitating this memorial. Thank you to all the individuals that participated by offering words of prayer and reflection. Thanks to all of the organizations that helped plan the memorial. And thanks to all of you for joining us to remember and honor those that we have lost. I want to remind you that we'll be coming together in December during our annual Homeless Persons Memorial Day, where we will honor the lives of the individuals that passed away this year while unstably housed. please keep a lookout for that announcement. We hope you can all join us.